Welcome to this deep dive. We're jumping right into an interesting source today. It's an excerpt from Fox News, an interview with Congresswoman Nancy Mace. She's a Republican from South Carolina.
That's right. And it's pretty packed. Covers quite a range, doesn't it? We've got immigration issues, specifically a judge's ruling. Then there's this big House bill about spending and debt, and even touches on some controversies about conduct in Congress itself.
Exactly. So our mission here is really to unpack all of that, pull out the key insights, the specific details, the different arguments being made.
Yeah, help you make sense of the core arguments on these, well, pretty complex issues.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this source. So first up, this situation with immigration and judicial power. It starts with a district judge, Brian Murphy.
That's the one mentioned, yes. Judge Murphy apparently blocked the deportation of a group of individuals described in the sorts as illegal immigrants. They were supposed to be sent back to South Sudan.
Okay, and that causes stir.
Oh, definitely. The source quotes the White House reacting pretty strongly, slamming the judge, basically saying he's not the Secretary of State.
Wow. So clear tension there between the executive branch and the judiciary.
And Congresswoman Mace, in this interview, her reaction is, well, even stronger. She gets very specific about the people involved.
How so?
She describes them as illegal immigrants who have been convicted of murder, pedophilia, sexual abuse, really emphasizing the alleged severity of their past crimes.
The source also mentions, sort of logistically, that the plane they were on landed in Djibouti.
Yeah, a temporary stop. They're apparently there until the whole thing gets adjudicated, formally decided through the legal process.
And Mace's view on the judge's decision and this idea of due process for them?
Very direct. Her argument, as presented, is that they didn't get due process on their way in illegally.
Okay.
And so her reasoning follows that they shouldn't get it on their way out. Her stance is pretty clear. Need to be deported immediately.
So she's linking how they entered to what rights they should have during removal.
Exactly. And she doesn't mince words about Judge Murphy himself. The quote is quite striking.
What did she say?
He's not Secretary of State. He's not President of the United States. He's not God. He does not get to override Donald Trump and his agenda to keep America safe.
So a really strong challenge to what she sees as judicial overreach in this case.
Right. And she broadens it out, too. It's not just about this one incident for her. She connects it to wider border security concerns.
National security.
Yes. She voices this worry, quoted in the source, that some countries might just open up their prisons and let these violent criminals walk right into the United States of America. Calls it a national security problem.
Okay, so that's the immigration piece. Then the interview seems to shift gears, right, to Capitol Hill and this big bill the House passed.
Yeah, the one she calls the big, beautiful bill.
Catchy name. What are the key parts she highlights from it?
Well, she focuses on two main things she supports. First, making the Trump tax cuts permanent. She calls that huge for the middle class.
Okay.
And second, providing funding and resources for our border, which ties back neatly to the immigration points we just discussed.
But it wasn't all positive in the interview, was it? There was another perspective mentioned.
Right. The source brings in Senator Ron Johnson, and he's got significant concerns about the spending side of this bill.
What kind of concerns?
Debt concerns. He's quoted saying this House bill contributes to adding, I think it was $22 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years.
Wow, $22 trillion.
Yeah, he breaks it down to an average of $2.2 trillion a year deficit, calls that completely unacceptable.
And what's the solution, according to the source?
He argues for getting back to what he calls a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending.
Okay, so a push for fiscal restraint. How does Congresswoman Mace respond to those debt concerns in the interview?
She acknowledges them, says she shares those concerns, actually. But she argues that President Trump has a mandate, from voters to move forward with his agenda.
So mandate overrides the debt concerns for now.
Her argument seems to be that the bill's provisions, especially the tax cuts, will help the economy grow bigger and better. And that growth, in theory, would absorb some of the concerns about the rising debt.
Kind of a grow our way out of it argument.
Essentially, yes. It's a common perspective that economic expansion can boost revenues relative to the debt.
And she doesn't want to delay?
No, she's quoted saying, now is not the time to stall. And she brings up a point about legislative strategy.
How so?
She mentions that Democrats, in her view, set the precedent that you can do more than what you can do multiple reconciliation bills.
Ah, reconciliation. That's the special process to avoid the filibuster in the Senate for certain budget bills, right?
Exactly. So her point seems to be let's pass this now,
Mm.
and maybe we could address some of those debt concerns in future reconciliation bills. It implies this is just the first step.
Interesting strategy. What about the immediate future of this bill? Does she expect it to sail through the Senate?
Oh, no, not at all. She seems quite realistic about the legislative process.
Yeah.
She expects the Senate will tinker with the bill in major ways.
Okay.
And she notes that negotiation means not everyone gets 100%. Cites examples from the House process like compromises made with SALT Republicans.
Those concerned about the state and local tax deduction cap.
Right. And the Freedom Caucus, the conservative group, they got some things, but not everything they wanted. It's all part of the compromise needed, she suggests.
Got it. Now, within all this spending talk, did defense come up specifically?
It did. Mace says she's glad that we're increasing defense spending.
Or I sense a but coming.
Well, yeah. Even while supporting the increase, she raises flags about efficiency, specifically within the Department of Defense, the DoD.
Efficiency concerns like what?
She feels there's more to do to codify the DoD cuts that have been talked about. And she mentions concerns about multi-billion-dollar contracts.
What about them?
She claims that some of our private contractors literally have hundreds of people on contracts that aren't doing any work. Waste, essentially.
So cut the waste, focus on what the DoD is actually doing. Is that step one for her?
That seems to be the idea. She calls that step one. But then she circles back to her broader point.
It is.
The need to grow the economy, like Donald Trump champions, to help absorb some of the debt and deficit that comes from government spending overall, including defense.
Okay, so efficiency plus economic growth is her formula there.
Seems to be, based on the source.
All right, one more major topic shift in this interview. It moves to accountability within Congress itself.
Yes, focusing on a specific member, Democratic Congresswoman LaMonica McIver from New Jersey.
And what's the situation there?
Mace has called for her expulsion from Congress. This follows McIver being charged by the Justice Department for assaulting federal agents at that ICE detention center.
Expulsion is a pretty serious step. Does the source say if that's likely?
It actually mentions Speaker Mike Johnson's view,
Yeah.
which is that expulsion is not likely to happen. So perhaps differing opinions within the Republican leadership or just acknowledging the difficulty.
But Mace is pushing for it anyway. What's her justification? Especially since McIver hasn't been convicted. Expulsion usually happens after conviction, right?
Well, that's Mace's key point. She argues that Democrats set the precedent under George Santos, that we can expel members of Congress without any due process, without a conviction.
Ah, the Santos case. He was expelled late last year after the ethics report, but before any trial verdict.
Exactly. So Mace is basically saying, you guys established this standard, now let's apply it here.
And she frames it as a matter of hypocrisy.
Very much so. She quotes Democrats saying, no one is above the law, and says, well, let's start with McIver then, who she says physically assaulted federal agents. Mace believes McIver should be charged and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Does the interview mention any other possible consequences, maybe short of expulsion?
Yes, things like censure. There's a formal vote of disapproval or stripping committee assignments, which reduces a member's influence.
And Mace's view on those?
She argues Democrats also set precedents there, saying they set the precedent for censure and kicking off a member off their committees for a few words.
Implying that if words warrant that, then an alleged physical assault certainly does.
Precisely. She says McIver has been indicted and has been charged for this assault. So those lesser measures are definitely appropriate in her view. She wants to use every tool in the toolbox to hold her accountable.
Wow. Okay, that interview really did cover a massive amount of ground.
It really did.
Yeah.
From, that specific judge's ruling on deportation and the national security angles.
To the whole complex dance around that big spending bill, the debt arguments, the political negotiations.
And wrapping up with this really thorny issue of congressional accountability and using past precedents. It's a lot.
So, thinking about what this all means for you listening, what are the takeaways?
Well, I think this source provides a really clear snapshot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shows these high-stakes political battles playing out. You see the clash between different branches of government, the courts, the White House, Congress.
Yeah, and even clashes within Congress itself, between
Uh-huh.
parties and even different factions.
Exactly. All wrestling with these core issues. Immigration, how we spend money, how we hold politicians accountable. The source lays out some very specific, very strongly held viewpoints in these debates.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. This deep dive really underscores a fundamental tension, I think. It's the tension between wanting quick decisive action.
like the immediate deportation Mace calls for, or pushing through a major bill because of a perceived mandate.
Versus the principles of, well, due process and maybe more careful deliberation. Things like judicial review, really grappling with those huge debt numbers or following established processes for judging members of Congress.
That's a great point. How do you, listening, see those competing priorities? Speed versus process, action versus deliberation. How do they shape the political world around us and the laws that ultimately affect you? Something to think about.